You ever noticed how some people walk into a room and command it, not with volume, not with force, but with precision? They speak, and suddenly everyone's listening. That's not luck, mate. That's strategy. See, most folks think winning an argument is about being the loudest voice in the room. They raise their voices, interrupt, throw facts around like confetti at a wedding. But here's what I've learned, running an empire built on calculated risks. The person who wins isn't the one who talks the most. It's the one who understands human nature. It's the one who knows that every person sitting across from you has triggers, patterns, emotional blind spots. And if you can identify those in the first 30 seconds, you've already won before the conversation truly begins. The art of debate isn't about destroying your opponent. Any fool can do that and make enemies in the process. Real power comes from making them believe they arrived at your conclusion on their own. That's influence. That's control. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. Because in this world, whether you're negotiating a business deal or settling a family dispute, the ability to persuade isn't just useful, it's survival. Let me tell you something about arguments that nobody wants to admit. Every single debate, every disagreement, every heated discussion you've ever had wasn't really about the facts. It was about ego. It was about identity. It was about two people desperate to prove they're not wrong because being wrong feels like losing a piece of yourself. And once you understand that fundamental truth, you've already separated yourself from 99% of people who think they know how to argue. They're still fighting over who's right. You're going to be orchestrating outcomes. I learned this the hard way in Birmingham, watching men destroy business deals over pride, watching families tear themselves apart over opinions that wouldn't matter in a week's time. And I realized something crucial. The moment you make someone feel stupid, you've lost. You might win the argument, sure. You might prove your point with impeccable logic and ironclad evidence, but you've created an enemy. And enemies, my friend, are expensive. They cost you opportunities, relationships, peace of mind. So the first rule of winning arguments isn't about being right. It's about making the other person feel respected, even as you dismantle their position, piece by piece. Here's how that works in practice. When someone comes at you with a viewpoint you disagree with, your instinct is to interrupt, to correct, to jump in with your superior knowledge. Resist that urge like your life depends on it. Instead, you listen. Not the fake listening where you're just waiting for your turn to speak, but real listening. You let them finish completely. You might even encourage them to elaborate. And here's what happens when you do this. They start to relax. Their guard comes down. They begin to trust that you're actually engaging with them, not just trying to dominate them. And in that moment of trust, they become persuadable. They become open to alternative perspectives, because you've treated their perspective as worthy of consideration. Now, once they've laid out their entire argument, you don't immediately counter it. This is where most people fumble. They've been storing up their rebuttals, and they unleash everything at once, like a verbal assault. Instead, you acknowledge what they've said. You find the 1 or 2 points in their argument that actually have merit, and you genuinely agree with those points. This isn't manipulation, it's intellectual honesty. Almost no argument is completely without merit. Almost no person is entirely wrong about everything. When you acknowledge their valid points, something remarkable happens in their brain. They think this person sees things clearly, they're fair-minded, and suddenly when you present your contrasting view, they're far more likely to actually consider it, instead of reflexively rejecting it. Let me give you a concrete example from my own experience. I once had a business associate who was convinced we should expand our operations into a territory I knew was controlled by hostile elements. He had numbers, projections, all very convincing on paper. My instinct was to shut him down immediately, because I had intelligence he didn't have access to. But I didn't. I let him present everything. Then I said, your analysis of the profit potential is spot on. The numbers do look promising, and I appreciate the thoroughness of your research. And I meant it. His research was thorough. Then I continued, my concern isn't with the opportunity itself. It's with information that's come to my attention about the current power dynamics in that area. And I shared what I knew, because I'd validated his work first. He didn't feel attacked. He felt like we were solving a problem together, and he agreed to pursue a different expansion strategy without any argument at all. The next thing you need to understand is the power of questions over statements. When you make a declarative statement, especially one that contradicts someone's belief, you trigger their defensive mechanisms. Their brain literally prepares for battle, but when you ask a question, you engage their problem-solving faculties instead. Let me show you the difference. If someone says, we should invest heavily in this new venture, and you respond with, that's a terrible idea, we don't have the capital, you've started a fight. But if you ask, how do you see us managing the capital requirements given our current cash flow situation? You've invited them to think through the problem themselves, and often they'll arrive at the conclusion you wanted them to reach, but they'll feel like it was their own insight. That's the difference between winning an argument and winning an ally. There's also something I call the strategic concession, and this is where real sophistication comes in. Sometimes you intentionally concede a minor point, even if you could win it, because it builds goodwill that you'll cash in later on, the major points that actually matter. I've watched men destroy negotiations, trying to win every single tiny battle, and they end up losing the war. You need to know which hills are worth dying on, and which ones you can afford to give up. In fact, when you give up a small point graciously, the other person often feels obligated to reciprocate. It's basic human psychology. We're wired for reciprocity. When someone gives us something, even something small like agreeing with our minor argument, we feel pressure to give something back. And let's talk about emotional control, because this is where most people catastrophically fail. The moment you get angry, the moment you raise your voice, the moment you show that you've lost your composure, you've handed control of the argument to the other person. I don't care how right you are. I don't care how stupid their position is. The second you lose your cool, observers see you as the one who's actually wrong. It's not fair, but it's reality. The person who remains calm appears reasonable. The person who remains measured appears confident. And confidence, real confidence that comes from genuine certainty rather than bluster, is incredibly persuasive. I've sat across from men who wanted to kill me, and I've kept my voice steady and my face neutral because I understood that my emotional control was a weapon more powerful than any gun. When someone is trying to provoke you, trying to make you angry, they're doing it because they can't win on the merits of their argument. They need you to descend to an emotional level where logic doesn't matter anymore. Don't give them that satisfaction. When they raise their voice, you lower yours. When they get aggressive, you get calmer. It's disconcerting to them, and it makes you appear in complete control to anyone watching. Here's another critical element. Specificity defeats generality every single time. When someone makes a vague claim, you ask for specific examples. When someone says everyone thinks, or studies show, or it's common knowledge, you politely ask, which everyone? Which studies? Whose knowledge? You're not being pedantic, you're being precise. And precision is how you expose weak arguments without having to directly call someone a liar. Most people operate on assumptions and generalizations because they haven't actually done the deep thinking. When you press for specifics, those generalizations collapse under their own weight. But here's the key. You do this gently, with genuine curiosity, not with aggressive cross-examination. You're trying to get to the truth, not trying to humiliate them. And finally, you need to master the art of the graceful exit. Not every argument needs to be won in a moment. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is plant seeds of doubt and walk away, letting those seeds grow over time. I've had disagreements where I knew pushing for immediate resolution would only create resentment. So I made my points clearly and calmly, acknowledged the other person's perspective and said something like, I think we see this differently right now, and that's all right. Maybe we can revisit this in a few days. What happens in those few days is fascinating. Without the heat of the moment, without their ego demanding they defend their position in real time, people often come around to your way of thinking on their own. And when they do, they don't feel like they lost an argument. They feel like they evolved their thinking, which is exactly what you want. The ultimate goal of any debate isn't to prove you're smart or right or superior. It's to move things forward in a direction that benefits you, while maintaining the relationship with the person you're debating. Because life isn't a series of isolated arguments. It's an ongoing network of relationships and negotiations and collaborations. The person you're arguing with today might be the person you need tomorrow. So you win arguments by being strategic, by being respectful, by understanding human psychology, and by never letting your ego become more important than your objectives. That's how you master this art. That's how you win.